This is Eleanor Voss at Still Point Institute, and today we are talking about something that most married men feel but have never been able to name. Your marriage started well, better than well. She was the woman you chose specifically because of how she made you feel when you were around her. Easy, comfortable, heard. The conversations were open and real. The physical connection was mutual and frequent. She was flexible. She was warm. She seemed genuinely interested in building something with you rather than simply acquiring you. And then, gradually, so gradually that you barely noticed it happening, everything changed. Not all at once. That is the part that makes it so difficult to address. If everything had changed overnight, you would have had something concrete to point to. Instead, it happened in increments so small that each one individually seemed manageable, seemed like a phase, seemed like something that would correct itself in time. The conversations became harder to initiate and less productive when you did. The physical intimacy became less frequent and less enthusiastic, and eventually something she permits rather than something she participates in. The warmth that once felt effortless became something you had to earn through behavior that you eventually stopped recognizing as your own. And when you try to talk about it, when you try to raise the fact that something has changed, that you are not getting what you signed up for, that the marriage you are living in is not the marriage you agreed to, something happens that you have also never been able to name. The conversation never arrives where it is supposed to. It gets deflected, redirected, buried under guilt or anger or old grievances that have nothing to do with what you were trying to discuss. And you walk away from every attempt feeling more confused and more defeated than when you started. There is a name for what has been happening to your marriage. And in a few minutes, I'm going to give it to you, along with the clinical explanation of why it works the way it does and what it means for the decisions you need to make. But first, I need you to understand something that will reframe everything you have been experiencing. My name is Eleanor Voss. This is Still Point Institute, and I am going to tell you something about female behavior in long-term marriages that most women will not say publicly because it requires an honesty about female nature that makes people uncomfortable. But this channel has never been interested in comfortable. So here it is. What has happened in your marriage has a name from economics. It is called shrinkflation. Same price, less product. The price you are paying, your time, your effort, your provision, your loyalty, your emotional investment has remained constant or increased. The product you are receiving has been quietly, incrementally reduced. Less warmth, less openness, less physical connection, less partnership, less of everything that made the transaction feel worth entering in the first place. And like the consumer who does not immediately notice when a bag of chips gets 2 ounces lighter while the price stays the same, most men do not notice this process while it is happening. They only notice when the gap between what they are giving and what they are receiving has become impossible to ignore. Here is why it happens. When a woman is in the early stages of a relationship, she is in pursuit mode. Not necessarily consciously, but the dynamic of early courtship produces in most women a genuine willingness to be accommodating, flexible, open, and giving. She is investing to secure something she has not yet secured. The generosity of the early relationship is real, but it is also partly strategic, even when it does not feel that way to her. She is presenting her best available version because that is what the competitive dynamic of courtship demands. Once the marriage is established, once the legal and social contract is signed, the competitive pressure that was producing that generosity largely disappears. She no longer needs to compete for you. She has you. And so the energy that was going into being her best available version gradually redirects toward other priorities. This is not unique to women. People in general tend to invest less in things they have already secured than in things they are still trying to acquire. But in a marriage with an asymmetric power dynamic, this natural tendency can become something much more systematic and much more damaging to the person on the receiving end of the reduction. What she has built, once the shrinkflation has progressed far enough, is a structure that serves her needs almost entirely while requiring her to give progressively less. She has safety, she has financial security, she has social status as a married woman, she has physical intimacy on her terms and her timeline, she has a partner who is motivated to keep trying, because the alternative is losing everything he has invested. The structure works extremely well for her. It works extremely poorly for him. And the remarkable thing about this structure is how effectively it resists correction. Here is why she does not want to talk about it. If the marriage were a negotiation between two equal parties who both wanted a mutually satisfying outcome, the conversation would be straightforward. There is a problem. Here is what I need. Here is what I am willing to give. Let us find something that works for both of us. That conversation is available in functional marriages where both people are genuinely invested in each other's well-being. In the shrinkflation marriage, that conversation is not available, because the woman who has built a structure that meets all of her needs at minimal personal cost has no rational incentive to engage honestly with a conversation whose only possible outcome is that she gives more. She is not going to negotiate herself out of a comfortable position. So instead of engaging with the substance of what he is raising, she engages with the process of derailing it. And she has had years to learn exactly how to do that with him specifically. Let me name the tactics, because naming them is the only way to stop being controlled by them. The first tactic is emotional escalation. He raises a legitimate concern about the marriage. She begins crying, not necessarily as a calculated decision, but the effect is predictable and reliable. He immediately shifts from the original topic to managing her distress. He apologizes for hurting her. He reassures her. He abandons his own legitimate needs to tend to her emotional state. The original topic disappears. She has successfully converted his attempt at honest communication into an opportunity for him to comfort her, and nothing changes. The second tactic is anger escalation. He tries to raise something that matters to him. She becomes angry, not necessarily about the thing he raised, just angry, in a way that fills the room with enough emotional temperature that engaging with the original topic becomes impossible. He shifts to damage control. He tries to de-escalate. He walks back what he said to lower the temperature. The conversation is over before it started. She never had to address a single thing he was actually trying to say. The third tactic is passive aggression. He attempts a direct conversation. She withdraws. She becomes cool and distant in a way that communicates displeasure without ever naming it. He cannot address what is not being said. He cannot respond to behavior that is technically within the normal range but unmistakably hostile. He gets frustrated. His frustration makes him look like the problem. She remains calmly in control of the situation while he deteriorates. The topic he was trying to raise is now buried under his visible frustration. The fourth tactic is the historical redirect. He brings something specific and current to the conversation. She responds by raising something he did 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, something that has been settled or that he thought was settled. Suddenly he is on the defensive. Suddenly he is explaining himself and justifying past behavior. The original conversation, the one he came in with a legitimate need to have, is completely gone. She has successfully redirected him from the present issue to a historical one where she has home advantage. The fifth tactic is the subject flood. He tries to address one specific thing. She responds with 3 other things, tangentially related or completely unrelated, that require response and explanation. He is now managing multiple threads simultaneously. The cognitive load of the conversation becomes overwhelming. He cannot stay focused on the original issue because he is constantly responding to new ones she is introducing. The conversation exhausts itself without ever addressing what he needed to address. Here's what all of these tactics have in common. They are not random. They are not simply the natural friction of two people with different communication styles trying to navigate a difficult conversation. They are functional. They work. Every single one of them successfully prevents the conversation from arriving at a destination where she would have to give something. And their reliability has been established over years of trial and error with this specific man, whose particular vulnerabilities and triggers she knows better than anyone. She knows he cannot bear to see her cry. She knows he will back down when she escalates to anger. She knows the specific historical grievances that will reliably redirect his attention. She has mapped his emotional landscape with precision over years of living with him, and she uses that map every time he attempts to negotiate for something that would cost her comfort. I want to say something directly here that requires a certain kind of honesty. What I have just described is not something that most women are doing with full conscious awareness of the dynamic. Many women who engage in these behaviors are not sitting down and strategically planning how to prevent their husbands from negotiating for their needs. The tactics are often habitual, automatic, developed over time as responses that happen to work. That does not make them less damaging. It does not make the marriage less of a trap for the man inside it. But it is important to understand that the woman you married is probably not a calculating manipulator. She is likely a person who has been doing what has worked without ever stepping back to examine what it is doing to the marriage or to the man she made a commitment to. Understanding this does not change what you need to do, but it changes how you approach it. Because if she is operating from habit rather than from calculated strategy, there is a possibility that naming the dynamic clearly and calmly, without accusation and without anger, can interrupt it in ways that purely reactive responses cannot. Most men who try to address these issues do so from a position of accumulated frustration. The frustration is entirely legitimate, but frustration makes it easy for her to shift into the emotional escalation or the defensive redirect without ever having to engage with the substance of what he is actually saying. The man who can name what is happening with clinical calm is significantly harder to derail than the man who arrives at the conversation already visibly at the end of his patience. Here is what that conversation actually looks like when done effectively. You do not raise the thing that is bothering you in the moment that it is bothering you. You choose a neutral time, a time when the emotional temperature is low, when neither of you is already irritated about something else. You start not with your complaints, but with a direct observation about the pattern. Something like this: I have noticed that every time I try to talk to you about something I need in this marriage, the conversation does not go anywhere productive. I am not angry about that right now. I am telling you because I want us to actually solve something for once, instead of having the same non-conversation we always have. And I need you to stay with me on this topic instead of moving it somewhere else. That approach does two things simultaneously. It names the pattern before she can deploy it, and it does so without the anger and frustration that make it easy for her to respond defensively rather than substantively. You are not attacking her. You are describing what you have observed, and you are asking clearly and specifically for a different kind of conversation than the one you always have. She may still deploy the tactics. Old habits are persistent. But naming the pattern ahead of time makes each tactic visible in a way it was not before. When she begins crying, you can say gently but clearly, I see that you are upset and I care about that, but I am not going to lose the topic we were discussing. When she escalates to anger, you can say, I am not going to continue this conversation at this temperature, but I am coming back to it when things are calmer. When she redirects to historical grievances, you can say, that is a different conversation that we can have separately. Right now, I need to stay on what I raised. None of this is comfortable. All of it requires a kind of sustained calm under pressure that most men in depleted marriages have nearly exhausted. But it is the only approach that has any chance of actually changing the dynamic rather than simply confirming it. And if the dynamic does not change after genuine, calm, sustained effort, if the pattern reasserts itself every time you attempt honest communication, if the shrinkflation continues regardless of what you do, then you have a different and clearer piece of information about your marriage. Not that you failed, not that you were not good enough, but that the structure has calcified to the point where it cannot be reformed from the inside. That information is also useful, because the man who sees clearly what he is dealing with can make honest decisions about his own life. The man who spends another decade trying to have the same conversation that was never going to arrive anywhere is the man who wakes up at 60 wondering what happened to the years. Your marriage started great. You remember what it felt like when it was. That memory is real. But the marriage you are living in now is not that marriage. And the first step toward anything better, whether that is genuine repair or honest clarity about what cannot be repaired, is naming what has actually been happening. It is called shrinkflation. Same price, less product. And you have been paying full price for a long time. Drop a comment. Men, tell me which of these tactics you recognize from your own marriage and whether naming it changes how you see what has been happening. Subscribe to Still Point Institute. Every week, we name what is quietly destroying your marriage before it costs you another year of your life pretending it is not happening.